Matt Lewis is a columnist at the Daily Beast now. He is a friend of mine for many years, an old colleague of mine, and he's out with a new book called Filthy Rich Politicians, the Swamp Creatures, Latte Liberals, and Ruling Class Elites Cashing In on America. Matt Lewis, good to talk to you today, sir.
Hey, Vince, good to talk to you.
I'm so glad you wrote the book on this subject because I think a lot of people do wonder what is actually going on behind the scenes that leads to someone like Nancy Pelosi becoming so stinking rich. What's the answer to that? How does that happen?
Well, it is interesting, right? Because she makes less than $200,000 a year, but she would have to work 500 years to earn her net worth if she was just making money from her congressional salary. So, yeah, most of it comes from her husband, Paul Pelosi's investments. And I'm sure some of them are perfectly legitimate, but some of them look very swampy and very curious.
Yes, and I remember there's various times where it seems like, and I'm grateful. There's now some reporting of people who track some of the stock purchases and stock sales of the Pelosi family, and they weirdly, coincidentally, seem to line up with really big decisions by the federal government that, in the end, benefit them financially.
Totally, right? So there's one in 2020 where Paul Pelosi buys hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of call options in Tesla stock. And then 5 weeks later, Joe Biden signs an executive order mandating the transition of federal, state, and local fleets to zero emissions vehicles. Mm-hmm. Imagine what happened to that stock. It went through the roof. And then 1 year later, just a year later, Paul Pelosi buys exercises $10 million worth of call options on Microsoft. This time, just 2 weeks later, the U.S. Army announces that Microsoft has won a bid to produce augmented reality headsets for the U.S. Army. And that could be worth tens of billions of dollars over the next decade or so.
Yeah.
It seems coincidental, right?
Now, for people outside of government, there are insider trading rules, I thought, that governed much of this. So you're not allowed to use privileged information in order to make these investments, and yet it seems that you have government officials who are doing this with reckless abandon, Matt.
Right. I mean, so up until 2012, it was actually legal for members of Congress to engage in insider trading. But then they passed something called the Stock Act. But it's now illegal to do insider trading, but it's very difficult to police. And I don't know for sure if what Paul Pelosi is doing is insider trading.
Sure.
But it looks very suspicious. And so my argument in the book, Filthy Rich Politicians, is that whether it's insider trading or not, it erodes trust in our lawmakers and in the process. So I think we should ban congressional stock trading altogether to avoid even the appearance of impropriety.
How common is the Pelosi family tactic in your view? I mean, how many lawmakers are becoming enriched to unseemly levels while they're in Congress?
I mean, I think it's across the board. If you get elected, you're very likely to get richer while you're in office. And there are different ways. In some cases, it's as innocuous as book deals. For example, Ron DeSantis just became a millionaire because of a book deal. Bernie Sanders said, you too can be a millionaire. This is a socialist if you write a best-selling book like me. But I think the insider trading thing is the most corrosive.
Yes.
And it's bipartisan, by the way. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, I think, is the most egregious example, but there are Republicans who are doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. I understand that, like, some of these guys are trading on their much higher profile. You know, you write a book because you're well known, and then you sell it and you make some money from it. And I think that some people can look at that and say, I certainly look at that and go, okay, that's not like the most corrupt thing ever. It starts to get more corrupt when all of a sudden you have like lobbyists and special interest groups buying copies of a book that nobody else would read just to enrich you, and then you turn around and do their bidding.
Totally. And we're talking about, somebody, a super PAC who buys 50,000 copies of a book, which maybe pushes it on the New York Times bestseller list, which,
Yes.
Results in royalties that potentially get pocketed by the politician. So the other thing, honestly, Vince, is these politicians don't quit cashing in once they leave office, right? A lot of them take the revolving door into lobbying jobs.
Yeah.
There's
Some
also
of them for
spreading
foreign
the wealth.
governments, for that matter.
Indeed. And then some of them spread the wealth around to friends and family. And in some cases, their friends and family trade off of their names. I don't have to go into Hunter Biden, but it does happen.
Yes, it definitely does. I remember when Bob Menendez was on trial for all of the lavish trips and gifts that he was being given by an ophthalmologist in Florida called Solomon Melgen. And it was basically a corruption trial. It was like, look, you're being bribed to take official government action on behalf of this guy. And by the end of the trial, they had a hung jury because Menendez had mounted this defense. Well, he's my friend, so he's allowed to give me things, and then I'm allowed to give him things. And then it was like, okay, I guess that's an excuse. So there is really corruption happening right in front of us, and there are, in many cases, very few consequences for it.
Definitely. And we saw, in Virginia, Bob McDonnell, the former governor of Virginia, once a rising star, had his political career was really essentially ended because his wife took gifts, a Rolex watch from a donor, and I think they paid for his daughter's wedding or something. And ultimately, I believe the Supreme Court said that it didn't actually violate Virginia law, that you can, if you're friends with someone, they can give you gifts. And if you're friends with really rich people who also happen to be, influence peddlers, it's, I guess, technically legal. It still did ruin his political career. But he ended up, being, I guess, in a way exonerated.
Yeah, there are lots of things that are technically legal, but totally unseemly. So what is the solution here? You did mention as a solution that we shouldn't allow members of Congress, and I would assume that means members of their immediate household too, to trade on their access to information inside the government. Is your view that they should have their money in a blind trust or something?
I would go even farther than that. I would go to you could have mutual funds, and that's it. If you want to be in Congress, you should not be, cannot be engaged in individual stock trades. Same thing with your immediate family. And what's funny, Vince, my book came out, Filthy Rich Politicians, came out on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, there was a bill that was announced that Josh Hawley and Kristen Gillibrand, so it's a bipartisan bill, Senate bill, are introducing a bill that would do just this. And not only would it ban stock trading for members of Congress and their families, but it would extend to staffers. And I completely support that, and I hope it passes, but I don't think it will because everyone is theoretically in favor of this, but it never happens.
I know.
I would also ban hiring families. I would, you can have a book deal if you want, if you're a politician, but you shouldn't make $1 million off of it.
Yes.
I would go with term limits, a 10-year moratorium on lobbying after you leave Congress. My book has a whole bunch of reforms that I think would not going to solve the problem, but I think would definitely restore some trust in our institutions.
Speaking of hiring families, I'm reminded of Congresswoman Maxine Waters. She hired her own daughter to be a part of her campaign and then paid her $81,000. So what they're doing is they take this campaign money, all of this money that they're receiving from people who are donating to the campaign, and turning around and laundering it essentially into the family coffers by paying their kids and their relatives for, some nominal job, but big sums of money.
Totally. It's completely legal, of course. And, Ilhan Omar directed millions of dollars to her husband's consulting firm out of her campaign. Bernie Sanders, for many years, has paid his wife, Jane, and even her kids out of his campaign fund to do things that she wasn't qualified to do, including being a media buyer. So this happens all the time, and it's perfectly legal.
Yeah, perfectly legal. Remember when Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, when she arrived in the Biden administration, she owned a bunch of equity in an electric bus company called Proterra when she got into office. And then, of course, what is the Biden administration pushing? They're pushing purchasing electric vehicles, in fact, forcing them on the American public. And it was only because of dedicated scrutiny by Republicans that she eventually divested from this electric bus company. But this is an obvious thing. If you're looking at ethical violations, this is an obvious conflict of interest. How could you come into office as the energy secretary holding a bunch of equity in an electric vehicle company?
Exactly, Vince. And so part of my argument is that, when Donald Trump says the game is rigged and then he wants to drain the swamp, that resonates because it's true.
Yes.
I mean, I think a lot of Americans, and no matter how you feel about Donald Trump, a lot of Americans completely agree with him on that because it is true. And my argument is whether someone like Jennifer Granholm or Nancy Pelosi, like whether they are actually doing something illegal, not illegal, but whether they're cashing in or whether it just looks really suspicious, it almost doesn't matter.
Yes.
Because either way, they are eroding trust in our politicians and in liberal democracy. I think it's incredibly toxic and corrosive for our politics.
Yeah, we're gonna do a story coming up about how Loudoun County officials have been taking really lavish taxpayer-funded trips overseas to places like Ghana and Uruguay and getting the nicest hotel rooms and upgrading their flights and paying for extra luggage on the way back to carry their souvenirs. And this is, you want to talk about eroding trust and making people think that you're just scumbags living high on the hog on the taxpayer dime. That's a good way to do it. By the way, on the issue of Nancy Pelosi, I want to remind people of what she said when she was asked about her stock market activity.
Should members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress?
No, I don't know to the second one. We have a responsibility to report in the stock, on the stock, but I'm not familiar with that 5-month review, but if people aren't reporting, they should be. Because this is a free market and people, we're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
Nancy Pelosi, big friend and fan of capitalism. She's saying, look, hey, don't you mess with my individual stock trades. It's worked out really well for me, Matt Lewis.
It sounds like she's Milton Friedman or Hayek or something. I love it. We're a free market economy.
Yeah, don't you know?
She changed her tune, though. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez criticized her after that, and Pelosi flipped. And so now Pelosi's on the right side. At least she pretends to be for banning stock trading. Yeah.
Even this whole concept of a blind trust, doesn't that have some big loopholes in it? Because it does feel like when people say blind trust, I'm never quite sure what they even mean. Does that mean that you have a broker who handles it but won't tell you the buys and sell and trades that he's making? Because if that's the case, you could just tell your broker, like, hey, I have no idea what you're trading, but I just want you to know there's a huge bill that's about to pass Congress. Do with that what you will.
I'm with you, Vince. It's not enough. But that ship has sailed. If they wanted to institute reforms to prevent this, banning stock trading, they should have done it. It's too late. It looks sketchy, and I've seen so many examples where there's something that clearly looks like insider trading, and then the politician says, oh, I have a blind trust. I don't even know what my broker's doing. And I just don't buy it. So I think too little, too late.
All right. Well, this is a real public service, this book. It's called Filthy Rich Politicians. The author is Matt K. Lewis. Matt, so great to have you with us, and congratulations on the book, sir.